All right, guys, let's get started. Welcome to my talk. My name's Adam. I'm originally from the UK. My roots are actually Polish, believe it or not. My parents are actually Polish, and I've visited this country a few times in my life. So it gives me great pleasure to... Dziękuję bardzo. My Polish is not good enough to do the talking, so I will be sticking to English. I now live in Switzerland, and I guess you all know where that is, unlike our American friends who get it mixed up with Sweden. Any Americans here? No, good, I can say what I like about them. No, it's true, if you introduce yourself to an American and say, "Hi, I'm from Switzerland, I live in Switzerland," they say, "Great, what's it like to live in Sweden?" And it really does happen, but I'm sure you all know where it is. So I'm going to talk to you today about open source. I'm going to tell you a few things that have happened to me. And I'm going to start off by telling you a story that happened last November. Last November, Microsoft, they did this. They open sourced the core framework, .NET Core framework. They did it at an event called Connect, which is broadcast live globally around the world. And it was all very exciting. So I saw this happen, and I thought, great, it's an open source repo now. Let's clone it, let's have a look. So I did that, and I found a build CMD in the root folder. So I thought, well, let's run that and see what happens. And this happened, right? Red text, never a good sign, right? I don't know if you can see, but it's actually failing 2 tests down here. So I thought, well, that's a little bit odd. It's a brand new open source repo. It's just been announced globally. How can it not build? So I had a closer look, and this was why. So there were 2 tests for these 2 types. There's a vector 2 and a vector 3 type. And the 2 string tests said, well, we're expecting dollars, but we're getting CHF, right? My computer's in Switzerland. The currency code is CHF. So it's obviously something to do with regional settings. I'm hazarding a guess that I was probably the first person outside the US to run this build. Probably the first person outside Redmond. So I took a closer look, and sure enough, it's very obvious why it's failing. So this line up here is fine because it's using the EN-US culture. This line down here is saying, well, use your default system culture and expect dollars, right? That's obviously not going to work outside the US. Vector 3, exactly the same, it's just 3-dimensional. Vector 4 didn't fail. Can anyone see why it didn't fail? There's one glaring error here. Anyone spot it? Yes, sir, you've got it exactly right. It's using the wrong variable. It should be using this one here. It's using that one up there. So the test passes. It's a flawed test, but it passes by virtue of its flaw. So I went and fixed this up. I thought, well, that's a really easy thing to fix. Why not fix it? So I fixed it in Vector 2. The fix is very simple. I just made it format the numbers 2 and 3 according to the local system currency symbol. So that fixed the test and made it green. Exactly the same for Vector 3. The more astute of you will notice that I put in an extra line break here. I have style cop OCD, so this is horrible for me. So that's going to be there forever. I inserted an extra line break into the code, so embarrassing for me anyway. Vector 4, did I fix that? Nah, I didn't care about that. The build was green, that's all I cared about. So I then tweeted about this because I thought, well, this is probably going to be the first ever PR to the .NET framework from outside Microsoft. So I tweeted this, and sure enough, it turned out to be the first ever PR. It got merged a few minutes later. This is actually the PR itself. I'll just skip forward a little bit here. This is the PR itself, and this went viral fairly quickly, and all kinds of people started chiming in on this. I was getting notifications on my phone for the retweets and notifications for comments on this thread. And I was at work at the time, and my phone was sitting on my desk buzzing continuously, and it was annoying the whole office. But it was really, really exciting, and yeah. Go and have a look at this thread, actually. It's really quite interesting, but it's very, very long, so I'm not going to play the whole thing. But that actually stopped. About a month later. It just kept on going and going and going. So that was really exciting. And it turns out that there was a plan. Okay, and Scott Hanselman later on in an interview told everyone about this plan. The plan was that he and Miguel de Casa would get on stage together, and Miguel would send the first ever PR to the .NET framework. And I kind of ruined that plan. So, and in fact, this was the moment that they wanted to do this. This is a bit low res, I apologize, but it says here, Adam Ralph authored an hour ago, and I don't think Miguel's too pleased about it. So sorry guys, sorry Scott, sorry Miguel, I am really sorry for that. But someone merged it, right? It wasn't just me, right? It takes two to tango. But that was a lot of fun. Now, as it happens, Scott did get his own back on me. In the interview where he described me ruining this plan, he said it was this guy Adam Ralph from the community, and I don't know if you noticed, but I wrote this on the PR. I wrote, "This fixes the failure on my DE-CH machine." DE means Deutsch for German, CH means Confederation Helvetica for Switzerland. So this is Swiss German. He somehow interpreted this as being Czechoslovakia, right? And he said, yeah, this guy Adam Ralph from the community sent this PR minutes after he made the announcement and it got merged. I think he's from Czechoslovakia. And after that, I became known as that Czechoslovakian guy. And this stuck. And I actually still have one friend who still calls me this. So good on you, Scott, for getting me back. Shame on you, because Czechoslovakia is not even a country anymore, and it doesn't begin with CH. But shame on you, Scott, but good on you for getting me back. So that was a lot of fun. So open source. What is open source? Well, I'm gonna talk now from three different perspectives. I'm going to talk about the OSS community, because that's what open source is. It is the community. And specifically, I'm going to talk about two members of that community. One of them is Microsoft. If you're not a Microsoft developer, don't worry. I'm not going to take a deep dive into Microsoft technologies or anything like that. However, I think the story of Microsoft in relation to open source is really, really interesting, because I think it demonstrates the power and the influence of open source. I'm also going to talk about it from my perspective, and this is not a platform for me to show off. This is a platform for me to share my story with you and my adventure and the things that happen to me in open source, and why I think it's a great thing. So to understand what open source is, I think it's important to look at the history. We need to look at where this came from. We can trace the origins of open source back to the 60s, believe it or not. There was a thing called hacking that kind of got invented at a place called MIT. And hacking in these days did not mean breaking into banks and stealing people's money or things like that. Okay, that was actually cracking. Right? And the popular press kind of conflated the two words, and now when you say hack to someone, they think, oh yeah, hacking into the NSA or something like that. But it's not what hacking meant. This is mainly centered around the Tech Model Railroad Club and the AI Lab, and it wasn't just MIT, it was also the Carnegie Mellon, Stanford, and a few other places. And they mainly played around with these things. This is the digital PDP-10. Has anyone ever used one of these? I'll be amazed. No, I'm not surprised. I think I saw one once. I think my dad used one at work. But they did great things with this thing. They actually got one into the AI lab, and they threw away the operating system and wrote their own one, because I thought it was better, called the Incompatible Time-Sharing System. And they hooked these things up via the ARPANET, which was the predecessor of the internet, and they started sharing things. And this hacker community started to be formed. And in 1975, a guy called Raphael Finkel defined the word hacker. And he put it into this thing called the jargon file, which is like a glossary of terms. It still exists. And he defined hacker as a person who enjoys exploring the details of programmable systems and how to stretch their capabilities, as opposed to most users who prefer to learn only the minimum necessary. So remember those words, because I'm going to call back to them throughout the talk. And incidentally, this was the year that Microsoft was formed. 1983, this is where I come into the picture. This is where I got my first ever computer. It's this thing. Does anyone recognize this? No, it's the Acorn Electron. It was quite big in the UK. It was a little brother of something called the BBC Micro. Actually, who here was born after 1983? Okay, yeah, thanks for making me feel really old. Yeah, this was the year I got my first computer. And the good thing about the Acorn Electron was it had a really, really good BASIC. And in these days, whilst a few games did exist on tape and things like that, one of the main ways we used these things was to type out games. We would get books, we would pull off magazines off the shelf every month with some new listings in them, and we would type out games and run them. And that was a very common way to do it. And this is the kind of thing I'm talking about. So this is basic, and what I did was I very much on my own way discovered hacking for myself, because I wasn't happy just to type it out and run it. I added color to these things, I added sound, I added a little bit more graphics and that kind of thing. So I very much in my own way personally discovered hacking, and I was kind of in my own way doing what these kind of guys were doing over in MIT, but on a very much smaller scale. And in fact, I can run this thing, which I'll do now. I used to be able to type this out in about 1 minute. So me and my friends at school would get around a computer at lunchtime, and I'd type this out and we'd play it at lunchtime. This took me hours. It took me absolutely hours to recreate this, because all the syntax and keywords have been completely forgotten. So I can actually run a BBC emulator, paste it in, and actually, does anyone know what kind of game this is by looking at it? Anyone guess? The variable names give it away. Yes, a racing game, yeah. It's not that difficult. You've got car and pothole and stuff. So there we are, in all its glory. And all this, although this looks a bit silly, I tell you, when I was preparing these slides, I spent hours. Oh, that's really poor. I'm going to have another go, right? Because I still haven't got down to 1,000. That's my goal. You see this little counter in the top left? I still have not got to 1,000, and I don't think I'm going to do it this time either. But it does get more difficult as you go along. These little red things get more and more frequent. And 256, nice number, right? Anyway, so that was a bit of fun. But believe it or not, in 1983, this was not the only thing happening in the world of computing. Does anyone recognize this guy? Richard Stallman, well done. He was one of the original guys in the hacker movement, and over the 60s and 70s, the hacker movement became more and more organized, more and more coalesced. And Richard had the idea of a free Unix. Okay, his idea was a Unix-compatible system completely for free, because these were the days of the proprietary Unix wars. There were many companies fighting to gain Unix dominance. And he said, well, wouldn't it be great if we just threw all that away and we built a free one? So he came up with the idea for GNU. And GNU means GNU's not Unix. It's a recursive algorithm. Right. So great idea. However, in 1991, this still had not happened. Right? This is 8 years later. And 8 years is a long time in software. Right? We all know that. Even in the 80s. So why hadn't this happened? Well, something did happen in 1991. Can anyone have a guess what that is? Linux, yeah, right. Fairly easy, right? So you all know who this guy is, right? It's Linus Torvalds. And yeah, he created Linux. Now, the incredible thing about Linux is that Linus had the idea, coded an initial version, put it online, and the first version was released in 91, right, the same year. However, GNU had been going on for already 8 years, and other projects had already been going on. So 386 BSD started in, I think, 88, 89, didn't come out until 92, took 4 or 5 years. Incidentally, Linus said that if 386 BSD had come out earlier, he wouldn't have written Linux. So it would have been very different. So since then, Linux became dominant, right? I guess not many of you have heard of things like 386 BSD, but you've all heard of Linux. Why did Linux win? Why did Linux become so dominant? Well, in '97, we started to get a taster for why. And this guy, Anyone recognize this guy? Well done. It is a guy called Eric S. Raymond, and he wrote an essay called "The Cathedral and the Bazaar." And what he described in there was, first of all, the cathedral. The cathedral was, the cathedral was the model which described projects such as GNU. And these projects were ones where a small number of developers had access to the code between releases. And they worked very closely together. And then when they made a release, okay, the code was out there, it was all available for everyone. And then they go back to themselves and work on a load of stuff themselves, you know, almost in secrecy. And then make another release, and the code was available, it was all for free. And then he went on to describe the bazaar. And the bazaar is the model, is the name that he gave to the model of development that Linus invented with the Linux. And he even goes on to say that Linus's primary invention was not the Linux kernel, right? Even though that's very important, it's a really good piece of work. His main invention was a development model. Right? Think about how important the Linux kernel is. And he's saying that the development model is even more important. And that is the reason that Linux dominated. It was developed in the open from the start in view of the internet. And open to whoever wanted to get involved, and a lot of people did get involved from the very, very start. What else happened in '97? Well, I got my first job. I'd been out of university for a while and decided to get a proper job. Please don't tell me anyone was born after '97 here. No? No, that's good. That would make me feel really bad. And I discovered something called VBA. Right? I found this button in Excel called Record Macro, and I pressed it, and I did some stuff, and I pressed stop, and this stuff appeared on my screen, and I kind of thought, oh, I remember this. I hadn't done programming for a few years by this time. I studied maths at university. And I recognized this stuff, and I started to hack again. I rediscovered my love for hacking through VBA, right? Quite appropriate. And I went on to actually automate my job. I was working in a bank. I was doing a very, very boring finance job, and I actually automated myself out of that job and handed this thing to someone else to run. And then I went and automated someone else's job. I'm not sure what happened to them. And what I've done here is I've just drawn a graph of cumulative users of my code. Okay, it's not a particularly important statistic, but it's quite interesting, and you'll see that as the talk goes on. What this shows is when I started hacking my Electron, this is kind of me, my brother, and a couple of friends using my code, right? And that didn't really change throughout that time. Then when I found VBA, sort of 3 more users started using my code. So yeah, really speeding up. In '98, now, '98 was a big year on open source, a very big year. A few guys at Netscape, who remembers Netscape, Netscape Navigator? Yeah, a few of you, right? A few guys at Netscape read Eric's essay, The Cathedral and the Bazaar, and they thought, oh, the Bazaar, Linux, yeah, that works. I wonder if it'll work for us. And they took the really, really bold decision to open source Netscape Navigator and Communicator and whatever it was, the suite of tools. And that became the Mozilla project, which resulted in Firefox and other things. So this was a really, really bold move, and it's the first example of a company doing this. It's the first example of a company taking their flagship product and saying, it's closed, it's now open, you can all see the code. And it's in direct reaction to Eric's essay. In direct reaction to that, a group of guys got together and said, we need a name for this. We need a name for what Netscape have done. We need a name for what Linux is doing. And they decided to call it open source. So this was the year that this term was coined. In direct reaction to that, a group of guys got together and formed the Open Source Initiative. In fact, it was Eric S. Raymond and another guy, Bruce Perrins. And they actually defined what open source is. So they come up with this open source definition. I'm not going to repeat it because it's very long. But it was like a canonical definition of what it means to be open source. in direct reaction to all of that, something happened called the Halloween documents. Right? This sounds very spooky, and it actually is quite spooky. This was a set of internal memos at Microsoft, and it was a bunch of fairly senior level guys talking to each other and discussing how to tackle this problem of open source. And I'm going to read an extract to you because it really is quite amazing. OSS projects have been able to gain a foothold in many server applications because of the wide utility of highly commoditized and simple protocols. By extending these protocols and developing new protocols, we can deny OSS projects entry into the market. Right? I think that's really quite incredible when you think about the implications. They're saying that the protocols are commoditized and simple. Let's make them specialized and complex. Right? Let's sabotage these efforts. To me, that's incredibly underhand. You know, it's like running a race, and instead of trying to be faster than your opponent, just sticking your leg out of the start line and tripping them up. You know, it's really perfectly illegal but ethical. I don't know, I'll let you decide. But there's a massive series of these documents, and they really do make for incredible reading. So that was the Microsoft of the day. Is there anyone from Microsoft here? I hope not, because if no. Don't take away my MVP. I'm sorry. Yeah. I am going to say nice things later, don't worry. 1999. So what was going on in 1999? Well, I became a software developer. I actually got hired to write software. So I was no longer hacking and automating one person's job. I guess I was automating a whole department's job, and I don't know what happened to them. And I did that using VB6, ASP and Sybase, so really stepping up in my technologies, and that had quite an effect on this silly chart that I've drawn. The number of users has gone from sort of the tens up to the hundreds, sort of a few hundred people using my software globally. 2002, Microsoft released something very important in 2002, not OSS. Yes, exactly. .NET's fairly easy. There was a open source project released, a .NET open source project released in 2002. Can anyone guess what it is? Sorry? No, I didn't hear the right answer yet. Sorry? Paint.net? No, I don't think so. There might be another one apart from the one I found. Well, it's NUnit. Right? That was released in the same year. Which I found really surprising, but really cool. I mean, it was a port of JUnit, you know, at least initially, so it kind of makes sense. And then fast forwarding to 2008, something was released in 2008, which I guess virtually anyone that is involved in open source uses quite a lot. It wasn't Microsoft. Does anyone know what this is? Take a guess. Sorry? Not jQuery. It's some. It wasn't Git. Git was actually 2005. This was actually GitHub, right? But that was a good guess. Git actually, it is surprising. Git wasn't around to 2005. You know, what did we do back then? Subversion, clear case, and GitHub was only released in 2008. Quite surprising. And this was also the year that I first used OSS. So I've been working in industry for a while now, working in an IT department. But I decided to take a year off. I decided to take a year off work and do my own thing. And in that year, I rediscovered my hacking roots again. I started to work on a lot of little private projects and playing around. And this is the first year that I remember reaching out to the OSS world and using OSS libraries. It's quite late on. You know, I should have done it sooner, in retrospect. In 2011, well, this was the year that Microsoft does OSS. Right? Now, think back to the Halloween documents. Right? OSS was the evil. It was the devil incarnate. They wanted to kill it. And in 2011, they actually decided to contribute back to OSS as a company officially, publicly. Right? So that's a massive, massive U-turn. and they contributed to Samba. So it's really quite an amazing turnaround for the company. In 2012, Adam does OSS. This was the year that I decided to contribute back, or I just found myself contributing back. I raised a couple of small PRs first, and then I actually threw my own project out there called xbehave.net. And this is actually an extension to xunit.net. It gives you kind of BDD capabilities. And this started off, this actually wasn't a completely original invention. There was a thing called subspec, which is a proof of concept, I think, written by Phil Hack and Brad Wilson. And I took this and I hacked it. I wasn't prepared to just learn the minimum necessary. I decided to explore the possibilities. And I took it in a very different direction. And I found it really useful for my work. And I threw it out there on NuGet for anyone else who might find it useful. The same year I got involved in Fake It Easy. And this was really interesting because this just happened completely out of the blue. Patrick Hain, who was the originator of Fake It Easy. Does anyone use Fake It Easy here? A few of you. That's good to know. Patrick Hain invented Fake It Easy, a guy from Sweden. And he just stuck his hand up on Twitter and said, I don't have any time anymore. Can anyone take over? And I said, yep, I'll do it. I just thought, well, why not? Stuck my hand up. He doesn't know me, but why not? And he went, yeah, okay, it's yours. Like that. And literally, all of a sudden, I found myself owning this fairly important .NET OSS project, which a few of you use, and it does have a lot of users. And this had quite an effect on this graph. This is actually the chart leading up to that year, right? So this is the chart leading up to 2011. And as you can see, after this initial jump here, things kind of stay relatively still. A few more users coming here and there, and admittedly, this is not the experience that everyone has when working in a corporate environment, but this is the experience that I had. Now, the next slide shows exactly the same graph, but with 1 year added to it. Right, so quite a change. I'll just do that again. This stuff here, right, is that stuff there, right? So in terms of just number of users, which is, as I said, it's not that important, but it's just an interesting metric. It's gone from the few tens of people or hundreds of people to tens of thousands of people, and this is based on NuGet stats, which I know are not that reliable, but gives you a rough idea of how many people are using a library. 2014, quite a lot happened in 2014. Microsoft announced .NET on Mac and Linux. Right, so not only are they going .NET, they're actually going outside Windows with .NET. So quite a change. The .NET framework, .NET Core framework went live on this massive global event, and some idiot ruined their presentation. Roslyn went OSS. So the language itself is now open source. Right? It's not the spec, but it's the canonical implementation. It's now open source. If you want to contribute to C#, you can do it. You can become an MVP via OSS, and again, think back to the Halloween documents. OSS was evil. They wanted to kill it. Now, if you do open source, they reward you for it. Right? So that the company really has turned around 180 degrees. I got involved in script.cs. Again, this happened very unexpectedly. I'd contributed to the project a little. I'd raised a few PRs, I'd raised a few issues and chimed in. And Glenn Block just chatted me one day on Skype, and he said, do you want to be part of the core team? So I said, yes, why not? And that was really exciting for me, because script.cs is it's a pretty high profile project. It's got a lot of followers on GitHub, a lot of stars, a lot of people contributing. So this was really quite a big step up for me in terms of open source. And this is also the year that I contributed to NuGet. And does anyone know about the development dependency feature in NuGet? Has anyone seen that? Okay, well, even if you haven't seen it, it's a feature that allows you to install a package, and that package is marked as a development dependency only, so it's not a runtime dependency, so that when you package up your package, that package is not a dependency. And I found that really useful. So I contributed that to NuGet. What that means is that every time you install a package via NuGet now, you're actually running my code. Right? Even if you're not aware of it, even if you don't know about that feature. But the thread passes through that code I wrote to check it's a development dependency. So that had quite an effect on this graph, again. There are about 10 million users well, about 10 million .NET developers in the world, according to Visual Studio stats and things like that. So even if only half of them are installing packages, the point is that this graph has gone now into the millions. 2015, so where are we in 2015? Well, the Linux kernel has been estimated to cost more than $1 billion to rewrite from scratch. So if it did not exist, there have been actually 5 separate studies done on this, and they all concluded that it will cost well in excess of $1 billion to rewrite it from scratch. So just think about what that buys you. We're talking thousands of developers for numbers of years. It's really quite an incredible effort. And this has all been done largely voluntarily. Not many people have been paid to take part in this. Linux now ships on 50% of devices worldwide. And this is all devices. This is servers, desktops, laptops, tablets, phones, everything. And in 2014, the figure was actually closer to 40%. Right, so what's it going to be next year? What's it going to be in 5 years? Who here knows Linux really well? Anyone? Or at least reasonably well? Not that many of you. Yeah, I mean, I think those of us, I don't know it very well. I think probably we should. Yeah, I think Linux is pretty relevant. There are 24 million GitHub repos. Again, just take a moment to think about the number. It's difficult to picture a million of something. There are 24 on GitHub, and GitHub is not the GitHub is not the entirety of open source. It's just one slice. There's a lot of stuff happening outside that. So the open source is a very, very big thing in 2015. Microsoft are doing even more. They've open sourced the core runtime. It's not just the framework anymore. It's the actual entire runtime is open source. They've open sourced some old friends like MS Build and WCF. Love them or hate them, it's nice to see them open rather than closed. This was funny. A guy called Mark Russinovich from Microsoft, a fairly senior guy, let it slip publicly that one day there might be an open source Windows. You can look this up. It really did happen. I don't know if this was a mistake, but and whether he got told off for it, but the fact, and I am actually skeptical about whether this will actually ever happen. However, the fact that this thought process is actually occurring in senior people, in the minds of senior people at Microsoft is very telling. For them to even be considering this as a vague possibility is I think quite incredible. And again, it shows how much Microsoft has transformed since '98 to 2015. Through the pressure put on it through the open source movement. What am I doing in 2015? Well, I own 7 open source projects. I'm here speaking at conferences now. I spoke at my first conference this year at .NET Fringe, and then I went on to NDC Oslo, and here I am at Dev Day. I became an MVP this year. And I got a job with a particular software. And particular software, it's Udi de Haan's company, who produce N-Service Bus on the particular platform. And we're an open source company. So now every day for me is an open source day. And I'm sure you can imagine how happy I am about that. And the reason that I list these things is because my path into these things, into the conference speaking, the MVP, the job I now hold, has all been through open source. There are other avenues to get into this, but for me, it's all been open source. It's all from those initial contributions, and it's all led to this. So open source has done quite a lot for me. And one last look at this silly graph. Given the increased contributions I make and the projects that I look after now, I'm going to stick my neck out and say that if you're a .NET developer and you're not running some of my code, fairly regularly, it's probably quite unusual, you know, even if it's just installing NuGet packages. So I've taken this arbitrary figure of 8 million, but you know, it's getting somewhere towards that global maximum of 10 million developers. And this graph isn't very useful, right? It's just like a big straight line and a big spike. But it's quite interesting if you look at it on a logarithmic scale. And I'm sorry, I'm a mathematician. I studied maths. A logarithmic scale is just, for those of you who don't know, it means that each bar is 10 times the bar below it. So this distinctly shows us 3 different phases. This is me playing around at home with my Electron. This is me playing around automating people's jobs at work. And this is me still doing this, but getting into open source, right? And again, I just want to stress this is not important. You know, the number of people running your code is not that important a metric. You know, if you write code that is used by one user and that user saves someone's life with it, it's more important than any code I've ever written. But I do find this interesting to show the reach of my code, the reach in terms of just number of people executing it, and the effect that open source had on that. So it's all very good me talking about contributing to open source, but what's it like to actually contribute? And I think I've probably just got about a little bit of time for a quick demo. So the nice thing is that you can actually contribute to open source these days without even leaving your browser. So I was looking at something in OmniSharp a bit earlier today, and this is something that Matt's going to talk about tomorrow. And I found, to my horror, that there are inconsistent if statements here, right? So there is an if statement here with braces, there's another one here with braces, and there's one here without, right? And I can't stand this kind of thing, right? So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go and fix it. So as I say, you can do this right in your browser now. I can click edit, and then I can go down here and, oops, sorry. I can fix it. And added missing braces. And phew, I just had to do that before continuing with my talk. Thanks to my audience at Dev Day. And I can propose a file change, and that will actually fork the project. I think I've already got a fork, but if you haven't got a fork, it'll fork it for you. You can create the pull request and submit it. And there you go. I've just contributed to open source, right? And it really is that easy. Thanks. So yeah, it's easier than ever, and that's a very trivial example. You know, all I've done is fixed a bit of formatting, but I just want to stress that no contribution is too small. I run 7 open source projects myself, and I always stress this. If you come into one of my open source projects and you fix a bit of white space, take out some extra line breaks, I'm going to say thank you very much. You've just made that file better. So no contribution is too small. Have you gone and merged it? Yeah. There we go. Hey, it's merged. Let's delete the branch. Right, open source in action. My name is now in the history of OmniSharp. So what is the future? For me, the future is I want to make more impact. Okay, so I've shown you that there's an enormous amount of .NET developers running my code now, but I'm not making that much impact. I'm making quite a lot of impact on a smaller number with some of my projects, but I want to make more impact on more developers through my open source work. I want to make lives better for developers. For Microsoft, I'm hoping there's going to be more OSS, and this is happening. This hope is being fulfilled already. I mean, it's almost like every week you see Microsoft open sourcing something else. So that is happening, and I hope it's going to continue. For the community, I'm hoping there's going to be more adoption, and I'm specifically talking about large companies here. I spent most of my career in very large companies, and I think there are still problems in attitude. in those large companies. It's problems in using open source, it's problems in contributing to open source. You know, if you're a company, you're writing something outside your core domain, outside something that gives you your competitive advantage, like infrastructure, make it open source. You know, why would you not? Yeah, so that's what I want to see. And the other thing I want to introduce now is you, right? Who here contributes to open source? A few of you, yeah, but not most of you. Does anyone here actually maintain an open source project? A couple of you, good on you. For those of you who haven't put your hands up, you know, I'd love for you to get involved. I think you are the future. You know, the open source community needs you. And how do you get involved? Well, contribute, right? I've just shown you how easy it is to contribute. Who thinks that they couldn't do what I just did? All right? No one, yeah, unless you're really drunk or something. But yeah, it's really, really easy, right? In fact, when you're drunk, you probably do even cooler contributions. Answer a call, right? If someone says, you know, we need help, or I'm too busy to take over this project, put your hand up just like I did with the Fake It Easy, and who knows? You know, who knows what might happen? Throw it out there, just like I did with xBehavior.net. I bet some of you have got that little project sitting there which you think, well, this would be cool if it was open source, but it's not ready, right? It's never ready. Right, there's a blog post on my blog, adamralph.com, called OSS It Already, and I'll talk about this more, but really, do throw it out there. You know, what's the worst that can happen? Before I wrap up, are there any questions anyone wants to ask me? Yeah. Would you consider that open source is more like philosophy? Would I consider that open source is more like philosophy? That's a really interesting question, because philosophy is very, very tied to it. If you read The Cathedral and the Bazaar, and you're reading it, yeah. Right? It's awesome. Yeah, it really is awesome. You know, I've scraped the surface in this talk, but if you want to know more, please do read this book, Cathedral and the Bazaar. It's really incredible. And one of the things it says on the front cover is actually the most important book about technology today, with implications that go far beyond programming. And having read that, and having been involved in open source, I absolutely agree with that. I think there's a huge philosophy there. And Eric actually deliberately avoids going wider than technology in the book. He doesn't want to bite off more than he can chew. He doesn't want other problems in trying to get us accepted elsewhere to slow down the effort in technology. But yes, I think open source goes far further into philosophy, and it affects things well outside technology. Open source you can apply even to building a house, right? Yes, you can. Yeah, you can apply it to building a house, yes, and you can apply it everywhere, absolutely. Maybe I have time for one more question, if anyone has one. Yeah. Okay, how would I convince a company to let me open source a project which I'm working on? I play them a recording of this talk, perhaps. It's a difficult question to answer. I would try and get the person making that decision to read this book. I've been involved in large corporate companies, probably like the ones you're alluding to, for most of my career, and I've not found a solution for that. It is a difficult thing to do, but I think it's a matter of education. I think we need to spread the word about why open source works, why it's so good, and why it's proven so successful for things like Linux, and why shouldn't it prove successful for us as a company. But I don't really have a magic bullet for that, unfortunately. Okay, so the reason I've given this talk is because you may have noticed quite a large gap between Adam does OSS, Adam uses OSS in 2008, so Adam does OSS in 2012. And I feel that if I'd heard this talk back then, I would have possibly gotten involved a lot quicker. And if I'd have heard it before 2008, I might have started using open source a lot quicker. So that's the reason I'm giving this talk, is that I want people who are thinking about getting involved to get involved. I've shown you how easy it is, and you know, in all the stories I've told you today, you know, I was just another developer who decided to throw his project out there, xbehave.net. I was just another developer who put up his hand and said, yeah, I'll take over Fake It Easy. And at Connect, I was just another member of the audience that spotted an easy fix and sent a PR. And in any of those situations, you could have substituted me with anyone in this room. You know, they were all very easy things to do. So I hope I've shown you how easy it is to get involved in this thing. So if you're thinking about getting involved, then please do. And you know, like me, you may never get that little card down to 1,000, but who knows? You might end up on stage at Dev Day talking about OSS. So guys, I hope you enjoyed the talk. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. I hope to speak to more of you in person during the 2 days. I'm going to put a slide up now which gives you free access to Udi Dahan's course for a couple of days. And thank you very much.